Hello, hello. That was a fun conversation, and good afternoon, everybody, for this little impromptu presentation that you're about to see. But you know, when we think about this market and we think about the level of sophistication that we have, it's really all about speed. And so, in response to Brian, I do believe in that conversation I said, how fast can you be? And that's really a big trick of what makes this all possible. And so I'll switch to the, oops, well, now I'm spoiling the fun. Oh no.
It's too fast.
Oh my God. You have no idea what you just missed, but it's so much fun. I'm going back.
Go back in
All right,
time.
there we go, okay. Admittedly, I've been on a lot of planes over the last week, so my apologies. In that conversation, one of the most important challenges that was thrust upon me and really just this ecosystem at large was, can we make decisioning smarter in programmatic? Can we get that decisioning as close as possible to the origin impression? And can we do that super fast? And so the best way to start to frame how this works is just think of what a typical programmatic transaction looks like today. Ad opportunities come into the exchange, from streaming, from app, from web. We kick off bid requests to DSPs. DSPs make decisions and place bids. That's kind of how the world works. And so the first challenge was, can we not disrupt this? Because this works really, really well. But can we also kind of punch a hole into this transactional framework to create a new chapter of innovation? And I kind of like the framing as well of we don't really know what this is or even how to name it or where this goes yet, because that's how it's starting to feel. Whereas if you think about the market to date, most of the time constraint that we've operated within has been within 200 milliseconds, which is the typical programmatic auction. But what we're talking about here is a whole lot faster. So to visualize that, and to visualize sort of where we netted out, I will now show you the visual you already saw. Which was, we had to find a moment in time to insert a new area of innovation. And so this was us having a little bit of fun visualizing some hybrid between a little bit of time that we actually have before programmatic auction and this opportunity that I think potentially is going to change this market. So on the sell side, before we submit those bid requests to DSPs, we have approximately 10 milliseconds-ish, which in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of time. If you think of a typical programmatic auction being 200 milliseconds, that's 1/20th the time. And in that time, we use it very well. We use it to authenticate the impressions, verify the integrity of the impressions. We use it to verify that the underlying device is connected to a human. In that same pocket of time now, we can also call over to Scope3 and ask them if they'd like to decision on that opportunity. And that's really the magical moment that starts to make this possible. And so if you start to then imagine where we go from here, those impression opportunities are actually very rich with metadata. When we connect to publishers, we get all of the signals that they possibly have available sent to us. And so if you think of device and page information, geography, user information, wherever possible, we encourage publishers to not just provide us domain, but URL, but bundle, content object detail, and even more recently, a high proportion of slots being made available and addressable through global placement IDs or GPIDs. All this data is now available. All this data is now available to be pushed into Scope3 and start to train really, really, really smart models. And what's exciting is that this can all happen miraculously really fast because we don't have a lot of time. 10 milliseconds is incredibly quick, and we can't block the auction. But that was really the original challenge, and that was the original solution. And what's exciting to us is this works. And it gets us to a very different ecosystem over time. One where if you think historically the way decisioning worked in programmatic, for the most part, we waited on the sell side for a DSP to place a bid and make a decision before any value was ascertained. By using this very quick pocket of time, we can actually now move to a market, and you'll see that we subtly changed the slide up top to one where the bid request itself can also be decisioned. And that's pretty cool, because if you then start to think about the value this can create, on one hand, if you look at this from a sustainability perspective, instead of having each DSP decision the same data 100 times, which is very computationally expensive, one decision can be made on the sell side and propagate to all DSPs. There's a huge amount of compute that this can save. On the second side, if you think about this from a brand safety perspective, nothing can breach the trust between the integration between the impression and the Scope3 decisioning model and its underlying agent or what have you, which effectively means hops in the chain and some of the other malfeasance that we've seen historically in ad tech really just can't get in there. The signals are authentic. The signals can never be modified or changed, and they can be used to continue to improve these models. And so what's exciting to us is that this represents a very new view of the ecosystem, and somehow, some way, the Scope3 team, and hats off to them, found a way to make this work in a miraculously short period of time. And so before I close, like the one thing that I do want to give a huge shout out to is both the Index but also Scope3 engineering and product teams who, for the better part of the last year, have put their heads together. You know, to some degree, we threw them into a room, left them with some snacks, and waited for them to invent what I think is the future chapter of programmatic, and they really did. And I have to say, like, there was a lot of skepticism on our side as to whether or not this very, very tight time constraint could actually be attained. And I think it just speaks to the level of engineering muscle on Brian and Ann's teams. And so we don't really know where this goes from here. We don't really know what this can mean because there's so many exciting things that we can now do with early decisioning, but we're really excited to be a part of it. So thanks, Brian.
Do you call it early decisioning?
Early, pre.
I like it. Anybody with marketing chops, tell us what to call it. One thing that I think is interesting too is if you think about the volume that you see directly coming from publishers, and one thing that Index has been extraordinary at is not having intermediaries. You're working directly with, I think, all of your publisher partners.
Yep.
And so that means that every impression here, we have the greatest source of truth. We know that it's exactly one hop away from real inventory, real ad slots. And so the volume we're seeing right now, is that 100% of the full pipe of what you're seeing from publishers?
Yeah, and that's the other miraculous thing. If you think of the market today, like it's a little bit technical, but we have so much supply on the open internet. Today it bursts to about 500 billion transactions a day, which bursts to 21 million a second. A lot of those transactions, though, are throttled before they get to the DSP. And so if you think of decisioning in the DSP, it might not always get every perfect impression opportunity because of the fact that historically there wasn't a prior bid that we could learn from to ultimately decide to send them. In the case of this integration, we're sending the entire pipe to Scope3, which is pretty cool because it's enormous. It's actually from a data size perspective, we've graded at about 2 petabytes of metadata every day comes through this pipe. So yeah, it's a pretty remarkable scale that's also underpinning everything that you see here.
Yeah, it's huge thanks to your team for making this possible, and to the Scope3 folks to, as usual, just say, sure, Brian, of course it's possible, and then probably drink heavily. But one thing we had to do this was to put servers adjacent to Index. And this means any partner we do this with, we have to have servers that are almost co-located because the speed of light is such that 10 milliseconds, every millisecond further away we are by distance, that means time. And so to get the most time possible, we have to be physically as close as possible. That's easy if you're sitting inside of a big public cloud. It doesn't work quite as well if you're sitting in a specific data center. So this is a big investment from our perspective in both hardware capacity and compute capacity in these deep integrations. But what we think it's going to let us do is run agents. And if you go back to what we talked about before lunch, the first agent we built was our brand standards agent, which in order to actually make decisions on every single impression, whether that was on Trade Desk or on Index, we had to be able to make these decisions before these, in this case probably PMPs, are sent off to the DSP. We can actually build a brand-specific, fully brand-safe, standards-compliant PMP for the first time because we can decision before it gets to the DSP. We're basically building trust an entire layer up the programmatic stack to make sure that nothing gets through. If you think about analytics, which Ariel referenced, one of the biggest risks for anyone in this system is the more hops you are away, the less likely that you're going to get what you thought you were getting. So by being directly plugged into the publisher, being able to make decisions before anything gets out to the DSP, we can screen out anything that's not brand safe, that's not brand aligned. We can add in all of these agentic decisions, whatever they do, and actually do that as quickly as possible before the entire programmatic process runs. So what we're talking about is technically impossible, but we did it anyway. So Andrew, thank you very, very much for making that possible.
Thank you.